So when we have sets of data, the idea is that you want to organize it in a particular way. And so we looked at frequency distribution tables, okay, and then cumulative frequency and all those sort of things. The problem with those is that as soon as you have more than, let's say, 10 individual scores, your table starts to get incredibly large. All right, because you start saying that there's, however many scores. If there's 100 separate scores, you need one row for each of those scores. You can't just have, so you've got to have a huge table. And then you have to count all the frequencies, and it gets very unruly. All right, so instead of considering individual scores, right, instead of doing that, we need to consider these things called class intervals, which are essentially groups of data. Okay, so you're just breaking up the class, you're breaking up the sets of data into categories of, say, 0 to 9, or 1 to 5, or whatever group you choose to break it up into. And then once you've done that, you just use those scores, use those groups of class intervals as your scores. So this breaks up the scores into just groups. You don't have to have 600 columns. You only have a limited number of places where you put. And then each score that falls into that interval or that category, you put that as 1 in the frequency. Okay? And so that's the way you put it. And so it limits the number of rows in a table. It makes things, larger data sets, much easier to handle. Now the disadvantage is that you lose individual scores. And what I mean by that is when you analyze it to, say, find the mean, or to find the median, or later on we're going to do standard deviation, these sort of things, you actually lose the individual scores, which means that slightly changes, in some cases a small amount, in some cases a large amount, things like the mean or the median, standard deviation. Okay, so that's the disadvantage. And we get more into that when we look at analysis, but for the moment we're just mindful that that's one of the disadvantages. But it is a very good way to... Okay, it's a very good way to do the data that we have, right? So we can move along. Sorry. Can you see this all right, brother? All right. So when analyzing group data, we take a thing called a class center. Okay, so that's what you use. Instead of all the individual scores, you put all the individual scores into that class, and then you use the class center to analyze the data. And the class center is the average of the highest score in that class or in that group and the lowest score. So it's the halfway point. It's the middle score, if you like, or the middle point of the class. You take as a class center, and then when you want to find an average, the mean, or you want to find a median, or you want to do standard deviation, or you want to do analysis, or you want to draw a histogram, or whatever you want to do, you use the class center as the score. Okay? So the class center is a very important idea that we have to use. All right, any questions about this? So the idea of grouping the data, not just using individual scores, we're going to group it into class intervals and then find its class center. Right, so I can come back up to this, but for the moment I want to go down and have a look at this example. So just bear with me. Could be a little bit tedious, but we'll see how we go. All right, so group the following data, all right, into class intervals, and then fill out the frequency distribution table for the group data. All right, so we're going to do that. And then you form them into the classes. Sometimes you might be told what classes to put them into, or you might have to decide. Typically you use intervals of 10 or 5. You might use 20 depending on how the spread is, but typically you'd use sort of 0 to 4, 5 to 9, or whatever it might be. Or what we're going to use is 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29. Okay? So that's the classes we're going to put it in. So I've got my just raw data here, just the scores. It's called the raw data. Okay, just a list of numbers. And so we need to group this into this table. So what we're going to do is, So that's the first thing we're going to do. So what's the first interval? So it's 0 to 9. Okay, so I'm just going to fill that out. So 0 to 9, okay, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39, 40 to 49, etc. You're getting the idea. Maybe run out of space probably. 60 to 69, 70 to 79, 80 to 89, and then we'll add one in, 90 to 99. Okay? Now the class center you find like this is, basically it's going to be the same for all of them. So for the first one you do 0 plus 9 over 2. You take the lowest and the highest, which is 0 and 9, you find the average. What's the average of 0 and 9? 4.5. Alright? So that's the class center. And the class center is important because this is the score in what we're going to use from now on as the score. Alright? We're not going to use individual scores anymore. We're just going to say, basically what we're saying is the score is now 4.5, and the frequency is all the different scores that fall into this bracket of 0 to 9 is the frequency. However many are, we're going to count them up, and then it's going to become that many 4.5s. Now, you can see clearly that then you don't have to work it out after that, really. The pattern is clear. 24.5, 34.5, etc. Okay, so you can just fill that in. $74.5, 84.5, and then finally 94.5. Okay, so those are our class centers. Now we need to find what the frequency is. So if I go back up a little bit, we can find what we need to find. So we're looking for anything that falls in the bracket of 0 to 9. And so we just go along it. We're not interested in what the actual value is. We're just interested that it falls into that bracket, into that class. So if we look along here, 86, so none of these, that's not any of them. If we go along here, okay, 7, that's 1. 9, that's 2. 3, that's 3. 0, that's 4. And that's it. Alright, so we go 4 in the frequency. 4 scores fall into that bracket. Alright? Next one is 10 to 19. So anything that falls into that, we're interested to find out. So we're looking, anything that falls into, okay, that falls in. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so our frequency is 5. You can also add a tally column. If you wanted to do it like that, to tally it, that's up to you. So you can add a tally column, but not particularly fast. Next one is 20 to 29. Okay, so we're going to have a look. 23, that's 1. That's 2. Is that it? No? 3. Alright? Tell me if I'm missing one. Alright, next one's the 30s. Okay, you get the idea. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That's 9. 40s. 1, 2, 3. Is that it? Yeah. 50s. 1, 2, 3. 3. 60s. How many are there? Somebody tell me. 2. Is that it? One more. 3. Okay, so it's 3. And then 70s. 1. That's 2. That's 2 of them. And then 80s. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And then the last one is the 90s and whatever's left. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so that's what goes into there. So we're going to column M7. And so basically that's it. You've organized it into a frequency distribution table. Now if you wanted to do it, you could do a cumulative frequency as well. Okay, and you could add a cumulative frequency column, and then you have all the scores, and now you can go ahead and analyze it. We're able to do all sorts of things, draw graphs with it, do lots of different things. Okay, so we've changed it from, if you had to do either a stem and leaf plot or a dot plot or something with this data, it would be extremely unruly and difficult to analyze. And then if you had to do a normal frequency distribution table, there's so many different scores, you'd essentially have to have sort of 90-something rows. So to avoid that, we group it into class intervals, and you find the class center, you find its frequency, and then you're able to analyze the data much more easily. Okay, so most things that for example, the ABS does, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, would be grouped. All right, a lot of numerical data you have to group, otherwise the range is too large. You wouldn't be able to do a very good analysis unless it's grouped. Okay, so basically that is it. Exercise is 4.9 to have a look at it and ask me any questions. Okay.